Turn on the mic. Well, good morning again. So glad that you are here this morning and so glad that you have joined us for worship here at Grace. So I want to start off this morning with two things. One, if you've not been here the past few weeks, or you may have just forgotten, we are going through a series called The Love Prescription. It's based on this book by John and Julie Gottman. They are a married couple who do relationship counseling and studies, and I had not read this book before we started this series, and I'm always a little wary of relationship books, that a lot of times, sometimes the advice can be kind of hokey, or it can be too much on this kind of religious tract, or it's too much on this kind of, so this is a really good book. It is really balanced. It's got loads of great study kind of advice, data advice, but also just really practical stuff for relationships. So I do want to encourage you to pick this book up. You will notice a lot of the themes. We're taking a chapter a week pretty much, but I do want to encourage you if this is some work that you want to do, and I think it's probably work that we all need to do. This is a really fabulous resource. So there's my first kind of endorsement. The second thing I want to say is, as we go through this series, it's important to note that when we are talking about relationship advice, okay, this is relationship advice for couples who are trying to grow, trying to get better, trying to navigate this wild life that we live together. When we talk about things like we'll talk about today, appreciation and admiration, these are not prescriptions for situations of abuse. These are not prescriptions for situations of infidelity. If you're in one of those situations, I just want to encourage you that this is not what we're talking about. That if you're in a situation like that you need a professional, you need someone to be the intermediary, you need an advocate in that situation. So I just want to encourage you, if you are in one of those categories, listen to what we're talking about. This is good stuff, but know that what you need is something beyond what we're doing in this sermon series. So I just want to give that disclaimer because I think that's important. So this morning, we're going to cover two of the chapters in the book, and the first one, I want us to think about when we have had a job before, and a job is a relationship, right? If we think about it, a job is a relationship with a boss and with coworkers and folks that we may manage. Have you ever had a job where the job was good, but you never really felt appreciated? Like the work was just fine. And there was nothing wrong with it, but you went in and out, and you gave of yourself day in and day out, but you never came home feeling appreciated for the work that you had done. Sure, you got your paycheck, you had your office, but you never felt appreciated. I've been in those situations before. As opposed to a job where you go in, day out, the work might be really tough, it might be really strenuous. You might have to navigate a lot of complicated waters and terrain. But if you feel appreciated, it changes the entire dynamic. Because you're not walking in at some zero to those jobs. You're not walking into those difficult situations with a half-empty gas tank. If you feel appreciated in your job, it changes your attitude. It changes how you go about. It changes how you feel at the end of the day, because at the end of the day, whether it's been a successful day or an absolute utter failure, you've been told by that company, by that boss, by those employees around you that you are worth more than the sum of your job today. Appreciation makes a huge difference, and it helps you deal better with the trials and tribulations that come. And just as appreciation helps in jobs, it helps in our relationships as well. There was a study that was done a number of years ago, and they were looking at happy couples versus unhappy couples. And so before they actually did the study, they decided to go ahead and and kind of propose a hypothesis. And the hypothesis was this: if we can just get couples to be nicer to each other, they'll be happier as couples. I mean, it makes sense, right? I mean, I'm going to be happier if we're nicer to each other, right? It was an absolute failure of a hypothesis, okay? So once they completely failed with this hypothesis, then they thought, well, all right, let's see what actually happens in real life. And so they took couples who were self-proclaimed unhappy couples, and they took couples who were self-proclaimed happy couples. What they found, and they studied them over the course of weeks and months, what they found was that both the unhappy couples and the happy couples were actually nice to each other about the same amount of times. This was confusing because they were like, well, if they're both being nice about the same number of times in a given day in a given week, then what's the difference? And as they dug deeper into the data, as they dug deeper into the conversations that people were having, they realized the one delineating factor was not how nice they were being to each other, it's how much they recognized whether their partner was being nice or not, whether their partner was saying kind words or not. It was the real determining factor was, in my relationship, it wasn't how nice I was being or how nice the other person was being, it's how often I'm recognizing my wife being kind to me, saying nice words to me, doing things for me. It was how often I was recognizing it, how often I was focusing on it, how often it was cognitively popping in my brain, oh, that's a compliment. Oh, that's kindness. Oh, that's an act of service. It wasn't about the frequency. It was about how we notice. There's a psychologist, a guy named Dr. Rick Hanson. I really like this guy a lot. He has done some amazing work. I've used his work in a number of situations and prescribed some of his work in my own life. He has really developed this field of neuroplasticity, which is just a fun thing to say, right? Neuroplasticity. Neuro, obviously dealing with the brain. Plasticity has to do with the ability to change and move and adapt. And so he's an expert in the field of neuroplasticity. He's at UC Berkeley, and he came up with this concept about how we interact with the good in our lives and the bad in our lives. And here's what he said. He said, when we have good things happen in our lives, whether it's a good comment, a good action that's done to us, something fortunate happens in our lives, he said that when those things hit us, they slide off like Teflon. My son's calling me. This is terrible. Technology, right? He's got to know what I'm doing right now, okay? I've been doing this for 25 years, okay? Good grief, Patrick. I love him so much. Wow, airplane mode is a brilliant feature. Okay, so neuroplasticity. So he said when good things happen to us, it slides off of us like Teflon, that we hold on to those good things for about 5 minutes. It's as long as we remember them. It's as long as our brain recalls them. The opposite, when a bad thing happens, when a boss says something mean or a spouse or a partner says something bad, when we have a negative situation, when someone cuts us off in traffic, that stuff sticks like Velcro. And so the study said that good slides off like Teflon, bad sticks like Velcro. It takes us up to 2 weeks to move past those bad situations and 5 minutes for the good just to slide right off of us. Now, the study goes on to talk about how this is actually an evolutionary development because when we were cavemen and women, if we saw Dan eat a berry and Dan ate that berry and then fell over dead, that needed to stick, right? That needed to Velcro for us, right? Or else we were going to eat the berry and then we'd be like Dan, right? And so there's an evolutionary concept there that has helped us grow and evolve and become who we are. However, it's an evolutionary drive that we have to fight for our own health in some ways, right? We still need to have that, especially as children. If you touch the hot stove burns you, you need to stick that in your head. Don't touch the hot stove again. However, sometimes that negative bias goes into overdrive in our lives. And there's actually a sociological term for that. It's called the negative sentiment override. Negative sentiment override. And basically what that means is a fancy way of saying negativity is a habit. And you know this because I bet you've already thought about someone who negativity is like someone's favorite hobby, right? Do you know those people? Like you go and you're having dinner and everything's great and they come and sit down at dinner and the next 10 things that they talk about are just negative things. Bad things are happening. Nothing's good. Nothing's good. Nothing's good. They did this. They said this. And it's just this negative overload. I want us to take that caricature of that person and set it aside because we do know those people. But what we have to recognize is that in each of us, we also have that capability of the negative sentiment override. It's those times in our lives where we can't help but see the bad. I do this with my children. I will come in and I've been focused on problem solving, which is focusing on negativity, right? You're dealing with it. I've been focusing on problem solving. I've been focusing on trying to fix things. And I'll come into my house, and if I don't watch it, okay, I'm an Enneagram 7. If you know the Enneagram, the 7 goes to the 1, which is the perfectionist when they're stressed. So if I'm stressed, I want to control everything and make it perfect. So I'll come to my house. And the first thing I will see, and it's not intentional, but the first thing I will see is mess, okay? I'll walk in their room, I won't see them, I'll see a mess. I'll walk into the kitchen, I'll see where Patrick has made a sandwich and left mayonnaise out. It's just, and I'll see a mess instead of seeing the ones that I love. And it's that negative sentiment override. We can do this with our kids, we can do this with family. I tell you, one of the places that I have the most difficulty with is in traffic. Okay, if I know that I have a trip at a certain time of day during one of these rush hour times, my brain will automatically kick into this negative sentiment override, and I will be looking for every bad driver. And guess what I find? Every bad driver. Okay, and this is that evolutionary concept that kicks in, but that we have to work to cure. Negativity is a habit. And if negativity is a habit, then gratefulness is the cure. We know, we've seen study after study come out in recent years, and these are neuroplasticity studies, that we can actually rewire our brains. We can hardwire them into negativity, or we can rewire them into gratefulness. And when we focus on gratefulness, day after day, when we force ourselves into practice day after day to focus on the things that are good, the things that we're grateful for, the things that we're appreciative of, it slowly begins to change the chemical makeup of our brain. It slowly begins to rewire the way we think, the way we see the world, and the way we interact with others. I realized this about myself, and I'm going to talk about 2022 in a little bit, but I realized towards the end of 2022, I was in a negativity bias cycle. I'll talk about it later, but 2022 was a rough year for me. It was a rough year. And I had begun to see the world through a negative lens. And I knew, because I study this stuff and I read about this stuff, that I knew that I had to do something to get myself out of it. And so I started 2 daily practices, and they have been life-changing for me. Every morning I get up, and I do 2 things in a journal. The first thing I do is I write the word today at the top of the journal. At the top of I write the date down, and then I write today. And then underneath it, I have statements that I write. And the statements are some of them are the same every day, and some of them change depending on what's coming up that day. But I'll write statements like, I will breathe. I will stay calm. I will be fully present today. I will remember that my worth is not based on what I produce. These are statements that are very close to who I am and the things that I deal with in terms of that negativity sentiment override. At the end of my today list, the one that I close out with every single day is this: today I will look for the good. That practice of writing these today statements, today I will, has changed my life. It's changed my life because I start out the day rewiring, affirming some things, and saying, I will look for the good today. Because the opposite is all too evolutionarily easy. The second piece of the practice is this. At the bottom of the page, then I write, I am grateful, ... And every day I list at least 3 things. I'll put number 1, number 2, number 3. And I'll list 3 things from the previous day that I am grateful for. And what that forces me to do is it forces me to reflect back over the past 24 hours and to look for the good. To look for those things that were good in my life, the things that I can look for and say, I'm so blessed. And I'll write those things down. I'm grateful for being able to play disc golf with Patrick yesterday. I'll tell you, almost every single Monday, in my I am grateful for section, I write about you. I write about the staff that I get to work with. I'm grateful for grace. I'm grateful for this amazing staff I get to work with. Almost every single Monday, I write about you. And what it does is it rewires my brain. It forces me to focus on the good instead of the negative. You see, when we appreciate our spouses and our partners, when we look for the good, when we are grateful, and we say it. See, everything I've been talking about are things I'm doing inside my own life. But when we translate this into our spouses, into our partners, into those relationships, it can't just be internal. It has to be external as well. So what I do every day is I look for the good in my wife. I look for the things I appreciate in her. I look for the things I'm thankful for that she does. And she does so much. But it's easy if I just get kind of in my own head, I'm focused on negativity, I'm just going to see the things that I don't like or the things that frustrate me or the things that rub me wrong or the things I wish would happen. So what we have to do is we have to start that neuroplasticity. We have to start the rewiring, but it also has to find a way out because when we appreciate our spouses and partners, it not only changes them, it changes us too. Remember that study at the beginning? It's not how nice people were to each other, it's how much you recognize how nice they are. It's not how many good things are said, how many compliments, how many helpful deeds. It's how often you recognize that, and that changes you. So see these things and appreciate those out loud, verbally, to your spouse and to your partner. And it will change the dynamic. It will change the dynamic of the relationship, it will change the dynamic of the home, and it will ultimately change trajectories in marriages. So our first kind of focus today is appreciation. The second one is admiration. Now, I'd like to do a quick straw poll. How many of you have a spouse or a partner who is not perfect? Let's go ahead and raise our hands. Okay, some of you raised your hands way too quick. And some of you aren't raising your hands. And I'm going to go and tell you, you're either blind or you're lying, okay? Or you might be scared, maybe, I don't know. Every one of us should raise our hands. Because guess what? I'm not a perfect spouse either, right? It's easy to say, oh yeah, I'm not married to someone who's perfect, but guess what? They're not married to one who's perfect either. And that's okay, because we're human. In the Gottman book, there's 2 quotes I want to read, or 2 little sections I want to read to you this morning, and this is one that really stuck out to me when we think about not having perfect spouses and not being perfect spouses. They say nobody's perfect. Each of us is our own unique bundle of good qualities and, well, not so good qualities. That's what makes us human. And frankly, it's what makes us lovable. We love each other because of our idiosyncrasies, not in spite of them. But when you're living together, raising children together, maybe even working together, as the Gottmans have done for the past 30 or so years, and trying to keep afloat in the messy chaos in life, can be hard to remember that. My wife and I have been married for 21 years this July, which is crazy to think about. And as I think about the things that drive me crazy about her sometimes, if I'm honest, and I remember back, those are the same things I fell in love with. It's those unique things that make her her. We have this tradition every night, once we finally get the kids to bed, we sit down, and my wife and I love to watch these British mystery shows. There's actually this genre called Cozy Village Murder Mysteries, and that's our genre, okay? We have to subscribe to BritBox and Acorn TV, which are these British streaming services, to get them, but we get them, okay? And we sit down each night, and my wife curls up in a blanket, and I sit down, and sure enough, she'll say, "Can you get me something?" And most nights, I'm like, "Yeah, sure, what do you need?" And get up and get something. "Can you make me a drink?" "I'd love to." But then there are those days where I'm like, "No, I don't want to. I want to sit here. I'm tired. I don't want to move. Have you seen our children today? They are terrible," right? And I just want to lay down on the couch. And I get really frustrated. Why can't she get up? She's all curled up in the blanket. Why can't? And then I remember, no, I love taking care of her. I love doing those things for her. I love the fact that this woman who goes out and serves so many people in her everyday life and does so much good in the world can sit down and I'm able to do good for her. And in my best moments, I remember that. A lot of times, those things that push our buttons are the very reasons why we fell in love with them in the first place. And then a second reading from the book says this: there will always be conflict in any relationship, no matter how solid the partnership, no matter how deep the intimacy. We now know that the majority of problems couples face are perpetual problems. They are not solvable. Take a second and just breathe that one in, okay? They are not solvable. They can't be fixed. But couples who take time every day to notice and hold in mind what they admire about the person they've chosen to weather the slings and arrows of life with are the ones who succeed long term. Admiration isn't something that just happens, it's something you do. Actively admiring the other person, appreciating them not just for what they do, but for who they are, is like air in a life raft. You float above the waves even when they get rough. Admiration, not for what they do, but for who they are. See, at the beginning we talked about appreciation. That's about saying thank you. Thank you. Thank you for what you do. Noticing what you do and verbalizing that. Admiration is getting beyond the actions and looking at the core. And the Gottmans recommend, if you're having a hard time getting there, the way to do it is start by remembering when you first fell in love. What were those qualities you fell in love with? And for some of you, that's a long time ago, so you might have to think a little harder. But what were those reasons you first fell in love? And I would add to that, what are the reasons you fell in love with them again 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 months ago? Because I don't know about you, but I re-fall in love with my wife. And it hits me out of nowhere. And there'll be times where I'm just sitting there and I go, oh, wow, she's great. I didn't notice that before. We've been married for 20 years, and I didn't even notice that. And wow, that's admiration. And the Gottmans say, think about those times when you've fallen in love and focus on that and let the admiration grow. The other piece is this. It's not just thinking about the things that you love, the things that are great, because that's looking at our spouses, looking at our relationship through rose-colored lenses. Because remember when I asked you to raise your hand, we all bring some stuff to the table, right? We're not perfect. I'm grateful that my wife doesn't only appreciate and admire me for the good stuff. But she loves me through the bad stuff as well. I alluded to 2022 as a rough year for me personally. January the 2nd, I preached a sermon. January 2nd was a Sunday. I preached a sermon that morning. Got home, had a normal afternoon, and about 8 o'clock that night, I received a message from a woman who I did not know. Received a message from her on Facebook that says, "Hi, my name is so-and-so, and I'm your mom's best friend, and she's dying." I hadn't spoken to my mom in 27 years. She abandoned me when I was 15, and this is the first contact I've had. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't answer the message. I talked with my wife, and then I went to bed. And my mom passed away around 3 a.m. that morning. It was a heck of a way to start the new year. Over the next 9 months, I dealt with she didn't have a will, so I had to deal with her estate. I had to figure out what to do with all the stuff that was out in Seattle, Washington, where she lived. And not only am I having to figure out all that stuff, I'm having to figure out this stuff too, right? All of a sudden, a really hurt, angry 15-year-old boy was bubbling up. And so for the past year, it's been rough. It's been really hard. And I've not been awesome. You can imagine when you're going through that stuff, you're not always pleasant. You're not always happy. A lot of times you find yourself being more irritable and focusing on the negative more than anything else. But I'm grateful that my wife admired me and loved me through my problems. Not just looked through rose-colored lenses at the things I do well, but she had empathy. She had grace. And she worked with me and loved me through it. So when we think about admiration, it's not about wearing rose-colored lenses. It's not just about focusing on the good. It's about loving through the tough. We have our demons, every one of us, that rear their ugly little heads at the most unexpected times. And so part of this contract of marriage, relationship, is for better or for worse. And so it's finding ways to love each other through all this. Here's where we'll close today. It's with Proverbs 12:18. Here's what it says. Rash words are like sword thrusts, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. Whether it's appreciation or admiration, or hopefully the combination of the two, words matter. Words matter deeply. So are our words going to be swords that poke and poke and poke? Are our words bombs that we lob into the room, into the family, into relationships that are destructive to everyone involved? Or are we going to choose like the writer of the proverb and allow our words to be a balm that heals and that strengthens? Words matter. Outlook matters. So our challenge today is this. How are we going to see the world? How are we going to see our relationships? How are we going to see our spouses, our kids, our family, our friends? Are we going to do it with gratefulness and admiration, or with a negativity bias? The Stoic philosophers will tell us this. You cannot control anything in this world. Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, some of the wisest people to ever live, they'll tell you this. You cannot control anything in this world, no matter how hard you try, except for this. You can control your mind, and you can control your actions. It's easy in a sermon series like this to go, well, but they can't control them. So let's work on our minds, and let's work on our actions. Will you pray with me?